It was a hot summer evening when three friends, Jack, Emma, and Chloe, decided to go camping in the woods. They wanted an adventure, something different from their usual summer activities. They found a remote campground near a small lake, perfect for a weekend getaway. As they set up their tents, the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the trees. The air was warm, and the sounds of the forest surrounded them. They built a campfire, roasted marshmallows, and told stories. It was peaceful, exactly what they had hoped for. Night fell, and the forest became dark and silent. The only light came from their campfire. They sat close to the flames, the flickering light casting eerie shadows around them. Chloe suggested they tell ghost stories. Jack and Emma agreed, and they took turns trying to scare each other. Jack told a story about a haunted house. Emma spoke of a cursed doll, and then it was Chloe's turn. She began, her voice low and serious. There's a legend about this very campground. They say it's haunted by the spirit of a camper who disappeared here many years ago. No one ever found him, but sometimes people hear his cries for help. The group fell silent, the atmosphere suddenly heavy. They laughed it off, but a sense of unease settled over them. They decided to call it a night and went to their tents. As they lay in their sleeping bags, the forest seemed to grow quieter, as if holding its breath. In the middle of the night, Jack was awakened by a faint sound. He listened closely and realized it was a whisper, barely audible, but definitely there. He sat up, heart pounding, and tried to locate the source. The whisper seemed to come from the edge of the campsite. He shook it off, thinking it was his imagination, and lay back down. But the whispering continued, growing louder. Jack couldn't ignore it any longer. He got out of his tent and looked around. The forest was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds. The whispering led him towards the lake. He walked slowly, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He reached the lake's edge and saw a figure standing in the water. It was a boy, pale and ghostly, with eyes full of sorrow. Jack froze, unable to move. The boy raised his hand and pointed towards the forest. Jack felt a cold chill run through him. He turned and ran back to the campsite, heart racing. He woke Emma and Chloe, telling them what he had seen. They laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but the fear in his eyes convinced them. They decided to leave, packing up their things as quickly as they could. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. As they hurried to the car, they saw the ghostly boy again, standing at the edge of the campsite. He watched them, eyes full of sadness. They jumped into the car and sped away, the ghostly figure disappearing into the night. Back in town, they told their story to anyone who would listen. Some believed them, others didn't. But Jack, Emma, and Chloe knew what they had seen. The haunted campground was real, and they would never forget the ghostly boy who whispered in the night. On a scorching summer day, Mia and her friends, Lucas and Ava, stumbled upon an old, abandoned amusement park while exploring the outskirts of their town. The park was hidden behind tall, overgrown trees, the entrance covered in vines. Intrigued by the eerie sight, they decided to venture inside. The park was in ruins. Rusted rides creaked in the wind, and faded signs hung crookedly. The once vibrant colors were now dull and peeling. Despite the oppressive heat, the chill ran down Mia's spine. The place felt wrong, as if it were frozen in time, waiting for something. They wandered through the park, the silence oppressive. The only sound was the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel path. They passed a broken carousel, its horses frozen in mid-gallop, and a Ferris wheel that stood tall but lifeless. The air was thick with the scent of decay. As they explored, they found an old fun house. Its entrance was dark and foreboding, but curiosity got the better of them. They stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under their weight. The air was cool and musty, and their footsteps echoed in the empty space. The funhouse was a maze of mirrors and narrow corridors. As they moved deeper inside, the atmosphere grew colder. Mia felt as if they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and whispers filled the air. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind, but the feeling of dread grew stronger. Suddenly, Lucas screamed. Mia and Ava rushed to his side and found him staring at a mirror. Reflected in it was not their own image, but that of a clown, its face twisted in a grotesque smile. They turned around, but there was no one there. The clown was only in the mirror. Panic set in, and they tried to find their way out. The mirrors seemed to shift and change, turning the funhouse into a labyrinth. The whispers grew louder, more menacing. Mia felt a cold hand brush against her arm and screamed. They ran, desperation fueling their steps. They finally burst out of the funhouse, gasping for air. The park seemed even more sinister now, the rides looming like silent sentinels. They ran towards the exit, but the path seemed longer, as if the park were trying to trap them. Just as they reached the entrance, they heard a laugh, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down their spines. They turned and saw the clown standing in the middle of the path, its smile wide and eyes dark. They didn't wait to see what it would do. They fled, not stopping until they were far away from the park. Back in town, they told their story, but no one believed them. The amusement park had been abandoned for decades, and no one had ever seen a clown there. But Mia, Lucas, and Ava knew what they had experienced. The abandoned amusement park was haunted, and they would never forget the sinister clown that almost trapped them forever. During a hot summer vacation, siblings Ben and Lily, along with their cousin Ethan, were excited to spend a week at their grandparents' lakeside cabin. The lake was crystal clear, surrounded by dense woods, and perfect for swimming and fishing. They had heard stories about the lake being haunted, but dismissed them as just tales to scare children. The first few days were filled with fun and laughter. They swam in the lake, fished from the dock, and explored the surrounding forest. Their grandfather told them about the lake's history, sharing stories of big catches and serene evenings. One evening, as the sun set, they sat around a campfire, roasting marshmallows and listening to the sounds of the night. Their grandfather, with a twinkle in his eye, decided to share the legend of the lake monster. He spoke of a creature that lived in the depths of the lake, only surfacing at night to drag unsuspecting swimmers down into the dark water. The monster, he said, was the spirit of a fisherman who had drowned many years ago. His ghostly form was now cursed to haunt the lake, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to disturb his watery grave. The story sent shivers down their spines, but they laughed it off, thinking it was just a tale. They couldn't imagine something so terrifying in the lake they had been enjoying all week. That night, after their grandparents had gone to bed, Ben, Lily, and Ethan decided to go for a midnight swim, daring each other to see who could stay in the water the longest. The moonlight cast a silvery glow over the lake, making it look serene and inviting. They waded into the cool water, splashing and laughing. As they swam further out, a thick fog began to roll in, covering the lake in a ghostly mist. The air grew colder, and the laughter died down. Suddenly, Ben felt something brush against his leg. He stopped, heart pounding, and looked around. The water was still, and his siblings were nearby, unaware of his fear. He shrugged it off as a fish and continued swimming. But then it happened again, this time more forcefully. He called out to Lily and Ethan, who swam over to him. Just as he was about to tell them what he felt, something grabbed his ankle and pulled him under. He struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the grip was strong. Lily and Ethan screamed, diving under to help him. They managed to grab Ben and pull him to the surface. Gasping for air, they swam back to the shore as fast as they could. Once on land, they looked back at the lake, the fog now thicker and more menacing. They could see a dark shape moving beneath the water, circling where they had been swimming. They ran back to the cabin, their grandfather's story now terrifyingly real. They told their grandparents what had happened, but their grandfather only nodded, his face grave. He explained that the lake monster was indeed real, and it had taken many lives over the years. The locals avoided the lake at night, knowing the danger it held. That night, none of them could sleep. They kept hearing strange noises coming from the lake, splashes and whispers that seemed to call out to them. Ben couldn't shake the feeling of the cold, slimy grip on his ankle, and Lily and Ethan stayed close, too scared to be alone. The next day, they decided to leave the cabin early. Their summer vacation had turned into a nightmare they would never forget. As they packed their things, they couldn't stop glancing nervously at the lake. Even in daylight, it seemed ominous, its surface deceptively calm. Before they left, their grandmother handed them a small old book. It was a journal that belonged to the fisherman who had drowned. "Read this," she said softly. "It might help you understand." They read the journal during the drive back home. The fisherman, named Samuel, had been a kind and passionate man who loved the lake. The journal entries were filled with his adventures, the fish he caught, and the peaceful moments he cherished. But as they neared the end of the journal, the tone changed. Samuel wrote about seeing strange things in the water, feeling a presence that shouldn't have been there. He became obsessed, convinced that something was lurking beneath the surface. His final entry was the most chilling. Samuel described a stormy night when he took his boat out, determined to face whatever was haunting the lake. He wrote about a struggle, being pulled into the water, and the last words were almost illegible. "It's real. God help me." The journal closed with a sense of finality. The story haunted Ben, Lily, and Ethan. They couldn't help but wonder if Samuel's obsession had led to his transformation into the lake monster. They vowed never to speak of it again, but the memory lingered, a shadow over their summer. Back at home, life slowly returned to normal, but the siblings and their cousin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. At night, Ben would wake up sweating, the phantom sensation of a cold hand on his ankle. Lily and Ethan had similar nightmares, their dreams filled with murky water and dark shapes lurking beneath the surface. Months passed, and they tried to move on. They avoided lakes and rivers, sticking to swimming pools and safe, controlled environments. But the memory of that summer never fully faded. One day, they received a letter from their grandparents. Enclosed was a photograph of the lake, taken during the day. In the background, just under the surface, they could see a shadowy figure. Their grandfather wrote that he had decided to take action. He planned to perform a cleansing ritual, something that had been passed down through generations but had never been tried. He believed it was the only way to bring peace to Samuel's restless spirit. The siblings and Ethan felt a mix of hope and fear. They wanted the haunting to end, but they were also terrified of what might happen. Weeks later, another letter arrived. This time, it was from their grandmother. She wrote that their grandfather had completed the ritual, but it had taken a toll on him. He had aged visibly, his strength drained. But there was a sense of calm around the lake now. The whispers had stopped, and the water was clear and peaceful once more. Relieved, Ben, Lily, and Ethan hoped that Samuel's spirit had finally found peace. They planned a visit to the cabin, cautiously optimistic that the nightmare was over. When they arrived, they found their grandparents waiting, looking tired but content. The lake sparkled under the summer sun, no longer ominous but inviting. They spent a quiet, peaceful week at the cabin, swimming and fishing without fear. The lake felt different, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. On the last night, as they sat around the campfire, their grandfather shared one final story. He spoke of the ritual, the ancient words he had recited, and the moment when he felt Samuel's presence leave the lake. He explained that Samuel's spirit had been trapped by his own fear and obsession. By acknowledging his struggle and seeking forgiveness, the ritual had helped him move on. The story brought a sense of closure, and the siblings and Ethan felt a new appreciation for the lake and its history. As they drove home, they reflected on their summer. It had been terrifying, but it had also brought them closer together. They had faced their fears and learned about the power of the past. The lake monster was no longer a source of nightmares, but a reminder of the importance of understanding and compassion. Years later, Ben, Lily, and Ethan often returned to the cabin, always remembering the summer that changed their lives. The lake remained peaceful, a testament to their grandfather's bravery and Samuel's final rest. They shared the story with their own children, teaching them about the balance between fear and courage, and the importance of honoring the past.